ults do come out, and a Bashnell does come out. It pins.
Oh, wow.
It pins, and a huge shatter coming up from Miro. That was a massive shatter, and the rest on the LPM comes out too late. What Platcher should have done there was fall down, but instead they kept staying on the Hydra and Arrow. That was all free range for the greatest comeback story in all of Season 1, the Bob Burgers are a testament that you can turn a terrible situation into one of the top teams in the league. Perseverance and an incredible willingness to be coached went to the busters of bots, making their mark on the novice division. While they may have not lived up to the expectations set for them in the end, they gave it a hell of a run.
Bot Burgers was formed from the ashes of Season 0's Uwu, a team that was just about the biggest dumpster fire possible at the time. The manager was completely inactive, the captain was depressed, and the team was constantly subjected to one of the most toxic individuals to ever play in the league. Lynchness stepped up towards the end of Season 0 as the assistant manager and attempted to give the team a chance to enjoy themselves for once. It was a clumsy mess, but there was hope at the players not hating their lives by the time playoffs rolled around. The moving into Season 1, Lynchness was an instant pick for the manager role, and he was determined to give his team the redemption they so desperately needed. The first steps came in the form of a complete revamp from Uwu to Bot Burgers, establishing a core that would remain protected from the draft. Huku would take on the role of captain, and they would be joined by the Jag 07. From the draft, a few promising prospects such as Saffron Rice, The Pigeon, and Z-Power stood as potential stars of this roster. Nevertheless, mostly everyone rated the Bot Burgers as the absolute bottom seed in the novice division. This had more to do with nobody having familiarity with the players than their actual skill level, but the rating stuck regardless.
Going into their first match of the season against Rio Redemption, the team had scrimmed a fair amount. They've admitted that they just didn't gel together at the time. It probably didn't help that their original coach from before the draft became inactive, and their new coach, Hamop, was taking the first few days leading up to Week 1 to observe the team before stepping in to coach for real. They were utterly dominated by Rio, lost 4-0, and to make things worse, their main tank had to leave midway through the game. People were expecting the Busters to be the Shanghai Dragons of Season 1, and for now they were unfortunately living up to that reputation. They would practice some more going into Week 2's game against Double Cap, and while they had received actual coaching this time around, the result was the same. Bot Burgers were simply behind when it came to synergy other teams had already established, and they'd need to step it up in order to work together if they wanted to claim their first win. Week 3 was their best chance in the near future, as Platchat was also completely winless and boasted only a slightly better map record. With the help of Hamop's coaching, the Burgers had actually started to perform well on scrims, surprisingly enough, boosting the team morale going into their match. They took an early lead in the series, and hype grew as they neared their goal, and ultimately they finished out 3-1, their first win under their belt. Bot Burgers were saved from falling apart, and though they didn't know it at the time, they were primed to become arguably the best team in all of Novice.
Somewhere around weeks 2 to 3, Kai had brought up the idea of having a scrim team of free agents to play with and against to better utilize the team's practice time. What their management quickly realized is that this scrim squad was also a perfect way to test the waters of the free agent pool and look for some new pickups to round out the roster. Having picked up only 9 players from the draft, Bot Burgers were in desperate need of some more firepower. 2 absolutely crucial pickups made from this scrim roster were Adifi and Ranter to round out the team's backline. Bot Burgers had always had a scary DPS lineup, and their front line was respectable at the very least, but their healers up until this point were sometimes inconsistent or underperformed. Despite going undrafted, this fresh blood would quickly prove themselves to be all-star level talent in the weeks to come. Week 4, Bot Burgers played against the undefeated Pepega Friends, and much as you would expect for the still-forming underdogs, they weren't quite prepared for the Goliaths standing in their way. They lost the series 3-1, narrowly missing out on the chance to bring it to a map 5, and Pepega themselves have been quoted saying this was one of their most difficult matches throughout the entire season. The Busters may have only held a 1-3 record at this point in time, but they were starting to earn respect. Bot Burgers managed to close out Week 5 against One Trick Wonders with their second win, this time with a bit more confidence and cohesion, which is particularly impressive considering they had just lost their main tank in Kai, and snatched up Arrow from free agency shortly after he had left OTW. The team started to play as a singular unit, managed to play around their newfound tank's aggression, and looked increasingly scary as the weeks went on. If they kept up this trend, Bot Burgers could potentially be the comeback story of the season. For the most part, the team stayed quiet during this break period leading up to the second half of the season. The scrim schedule died down a bit, and the team took some quality bonding time with Papega Parrots via Jackbox. The starting lineup had been more or less solidified, and there wasn't really any need for any more roster changes. They stuck to their guns, took some time to relax, and mentally prepared for their revenge against Rio the following week. And revenge would be theirs. The Botburgers flat out looked like the better team in Week 6, and it was a dominant effort on their part. A clean 4-0 sweep against Rio cemented the Bots' legacy in the league as a tried and true comeback story. Rio were no slouches, and yet they were just obliterated by a team that was once dead last in the standings. This was not their opponents falling apart, this was the Botbusters' efforts coming to life and finally yielding consistent results. Botburgers would go on to win out the remainder of the season, including their match against their friends and rivals Papega Parrots. The Busters would become the first and only team in Novice to complete the perfect half season, as well as the longest win streak of 6 games. From Week 5 onwards, Botburgers didn't lose a single game for the entirety of the regular season. They, alongside Rio, managed to tie Papega in match differential. Unfortunately for them, the Parrots had such an astronomically high map differential that no one had any hopes of stealing their number 1 seed. Botburgers did, however, manage to claim the number 2 seed, edging out 1 map higher in their differential than Rio, giving them a bye round straight to the semifinals.
Now, it's worth noting that around the end of the regular season, leading up to playoffs, there was some drama going on inside the team. It revolved mostly around 2 things. The team wasn't scrimming enough to get worthwhile practice, and the backup main tank, Penguin of 507, was getting playtime over Arrow in the few scrims they had. From management's perspective, most of the scrims they could find were already practicing 2-2-2 for the upcoming Open Division season, but League Zero was obviously still in GOATS meta until the end of the season. They also didn't want to practice against other teams in the league at the risk of leaking their strategies. Ultimately, the players organized scrims against League Zero teams and kept them a secret from management up until the press conference after the season. It was an awkward reveal. Around weeks 7 to 8, Arrow had threatened to lead the team as a result of being benched for a few scrims, but was thankfully talked out by Lichness and Ranter. However, while the team kept their main tank, the management almost entirely lost confidence to lead. They were afraid that standing up to their own players might cause another movement to resign before the season was over. This probably contributed to the lack of drive to find practice, consequently hurting the team in the long run.
Miraculously, Platcha had managed to catch fire at the exact right time and managed to defeat Rio in the quarterfinals. Despite the surprise of who their opponents would be, Botburger still acted as though their victory was assured against the bottom place team during the regular season. They either didn't pay attention to the explosive momentum their opponents displayed, or didn't care. That arrogance would come back to bite them as Platchat came in like a team possessed, stealing the series away in an epic 3-1 fashion. Their DPS completely outshined Botburgers, the healers were consistently getting more value from Onanades and Transcendences, and they punished Arrow so hard he couldn't step out of position without being antied and melted in a matter of seconds. Platchat simply outplayed Botburgers, and the would-be champions, the supposed chosen ones, had fallen, taken out by their own confidence.
Despite the disappointing end to their win streak, what the Botburgers managed to accomplish is nothing shy of spectacular. The amount of fortitude it takes to come back from being 0-2 with a -8 map differential after the first 2 weeks is out of this world, and to bring it back around to steal the 2nd seed for the regular season rankings is truly the greatest comeback this league has ever seen. And yes, even greater than Platchat. Don't worry, I'll get to them in due time. But back to the Botbusters, they exemplify never giving up and working with what you've got to make the best team you possibly can. They did almost everything right, and right up until the end they had some of the best possible attitudes you could have when going about this sort of dominant streak. To me, at the very least, they are the most memorable team for the entirety of Season 1, and I can't wait to see where these players end up come Season 2. B+.
Arrow's a boomer.